Somewhere beyond the fog, where the wind still remembers forgotten names, a story stirs quietly, waiting to be felt. Not told. This is a whisper from elsewhere. Let us begin our story. Life won the soldier. He was a humble farmer. Each morning he rose with the sun and worked the fields. His home was small but filled with warmth. His wife would greet him with a smile, his children with laughter. Then he would look up at the mountains, a feeling of peace in his heart. But one day, war came. Men in dark armor arrived, taking everything and leaving only pain. They took his life, they took his wife, they took his children. They even took his home, leaving him with nothing but ashes and grief. In his rage, he picked up a sword. It was heavy, unfamiliar, yet somehow natural. He joined the men from his village and they fought back, taking what was theirs. He fought not for land or treasure, but to reclaim what was stolen from him. To his surprise, he fought well. Strong from years of labor, he survived where others fell. So when a general was needed, he was chosen. When villagers were lost, he led the charge to take them back. Soon, he was a hero, a leader, a legend. Cheers echoed his name. Flags bore his emblem. Children sang of his valor, and he basked in the adoration. And then he came to understand, war is not about honor, glory, or legacy. War is blood and fire. War is watching families burn and children die. Even victories taste like ashes. He wanted to stop the war, to bring peace to the land. But peace doesn't listen to pleas, only to the language of strength. So he fought harder, taking back more land until finally the enemy fell. He stood amidst the ruins of the war. He ended, exhausted and broken. He wanted to heal the world, but his hands were stained with the blood of victory. Suddenly, men he once saved came upon him, their faces twisted with hate. "You betrayed us," they cried. "You sold our villagers to the enemy." It was a lie, but who would believe him? Not the men pointing their swords at his throat. He knew then that sometimes endings are just new beginnings, and death is not the end, especially when there is more fighting to be done. He was taken to a hill overlooking the plains where he grew up. The same fields, the same river, the same mountain, only now, the wind carried the scent of death. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, knowing this was where he belonged, in the place where he was born, under the sky where he died. When he opened his eyes again, the sun was setting over the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of orange and red. And as darkness fell, so did the rain. It washed over him, cleansing him, preparing him for the next chapter of his long story. Life 2, the teacher. He woke up in a small village, a stark contrast to the grand halls he remembered from his previous life. Confused and disoriented, he felt drawn to a local school. As he approached, he heard the sound of children laughing and playing. He found a position as a teacher there. One day, a rich boy joined the class. He was arrogant, cruel, and spoiled. He sneered at the other children and threw tantrums when he didn't get his way. The other students disliked him. They whispered and pointed, but he paid them no heed. The teacher, though, saw something worth saving in the boy. He treated him with kindness, patience, and understanding. He taught him not just academics, but life lessons. Slowly, the boy began to change. He became a better student, helping others, and sharing his knowledge. He even stood up to bullies, defending those who were weaker. Then one day, a fight broke out in the schoolyard. The teacher, worried for his students, rushed outside. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was the rich boy, cornered by 3 older boys, one of whom was his own brother. They beat him mercilessly, and the teacher, in a flash of anger and protective instinct, stepped in front of him, pushing the attacker away. Something flickered in the boy's eyes, a warrior's reflex honed by years of battle. With a speed that belied his gentle nature, he swept the other 2 boys off their feet, sending them crashing to the ground. He turned back to the third, who stood frozen in shock. "Get out," he commanded, his voice surprisingly firm, and the boy didn't hesitate. He ran. The teacher, shaken by what he had just witnessed, helped the bruised boy back to his feet. "How?" he asked, bewildered. "How could you fight like that?" The boy looked at him, his eyes filled with newfound respect. "I don't know," he replied. "It just came over me." As days turned into weeks, the boy continued to amaze his classmates and teachers with his unexpected strength and courage. However, one afternoon, the 3 boys who had been beaten returned with reinforcements. This time, there were 5 of them, and they charged into the courtyard, intent on revenge. The boy stood alone, facing them, while the teacher desperately tried to make sense of what was happening. The fight was brutal and fast. The teacher watched in horror as the boy, despite his best efforts, was outnumbered and overwhelmed. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He looked down to see a dagger protruding from his chest. The boy had been stabbed. With a strength born of adrenaline and desperation, he managed to stand, staggering back as his attackers closed in for the kill, but it was too late. He collapsed, falling to his knees with a gasp. Blood trickled down his chin, staining the ground crimson. His eyes met the teacher's, and in that moment, the teacher understood. The boy hadn't just defended himself. He had protected his friends. He had embraced the teachings of kindness, empathy, and standing up for what's right. He had become a true hero. In his final moments, the boy whispered, "Violence is not the answer." And with that, his eyes fluttered closed and his head slumped forward. The teacher cradled the lifeless form, his heart breaking as he realized the irony of the situation. The boy, who had been taught the values of peace, had died violently, proving that sometimes the greatest lessons are learned too late. Life 3, the outcast. He was born under a bad omen, a blazing red sun during an eclipse. His mother, a servant, was cursed by the queen after she accidentally spilled water on her. "May your child be born under the shadow of misfortune," she snarled. And so it was. From birth, he was hated, beaten, and left to fend for himself. Starved and neglected, he grew up with nothing but bitterness in his heart. He stole to survive, hurting those who reminded him of his miserable childhood. He was reckless and violent, feared by all, yet secretly, he longed for acceptance. He dreamed of belonging, of being part of a community. But his past followed him, a dark cloud of mistrust wherever he went. People whispered, "There he is, the monster, the outcast, the child of the devil." And he internalized their words, believing he was destined for a life of misery. He gathered followers, outcasts like him, and together they terrorized the kingdom. He became known as the Shadow Lord, feared and respected in equal measure. But deep down he was still that abandoned infant, crying out for love and understanding. He amassed wealth and power, but it wasn't enough to quell the emptiness within him. Karma, though, remembers. One by one, those who had wronged him came back into his life seeking help, begging for mercy. He could have forgiven them, but he chose not to. Instead, he reveled in their pain, reveling in the misfortunes that befell them, seeing their anguish as a reflection of his own. Then came the betrayal. Those he trusted stabbed him in the back, stealing his fortune and leaving him for dead. He was hunted, captured, and burned alive. No one mourned him. No one remembered that he, too, had been a victim of circumstance, a pawn in a game of power where he was dealt a losing hand from the start. Life for the king. He was born into royalty, a pampered prince who became a powerful king. He inherited a prosperous kingdom, but he cared for none of that. He had no interest in ruling, in making his people happy or leaving a legacy of justice and equality. He married many times, but not for love or companionship. He discarded his wives when they no longer amused him, showing no remorse for the hearts he broke. He hosted lavish parties, inviting countless men and women, but he wasn't interested in socializing. He used these gatherings to satisfy his lust, treating people like disposable objects. His obsession with pleasure was all-consuming, pushing him to extremes. He accumulated vast amounts of gold and jewels, but never deigned to notice them. He was a puppet in the hands of his counselors, signing decrees without reading them, allowing nobles to exploit their lands and mistreat their tenants. While he indulged in the opulent palace, his people suffered. They toiled under the harsh rule of the nobility who cared little for their plight. The king's apathy created an environment of misery, which only fueled discontent. Then one day, a rumor spread throughout the kingdom, a whisper of rebellion. People spoke in hushed tones of a revolution, a chance to overthrow the oppressive rule and establish a better way of life. The king, isolated in his world of pleasure, paid them no heed. As the whispers grew louder, becoming chants of defiance, the people rose up. They stormed the gates of the city, their voices echoing with anger and despair. The king, startled by the commotion, finally realized the gravity of the situation. But it was too late. He watched in horror as his people, tired of being subjugated, seized control of the city. The nobles who had profited from his apathy were nowhere to be seen, leaving him to face the consequences of his inaction. In the end, he met a grim fate, deposed, stripped of his power and dignity. As his crown fell to the ground, his head followed, severed from his body by the very people he had ignored for so long. Life 5. The common man. This time, he lived a simple life, a quiet life. He had a loving wife. He had grandchildren. He played with them in the fields, telling them stories of bravery and kindness. He had no interest in war, power, or riches. He was content with his humble home, his garden, his family. He didn't seek glory or write his name in history books. He just lived, loved, and laughed. Then one day, he died an old man, finally content, finally at peace. After all 5 lives, he found himself back in the same field where he was born, the one where he died in his first life. Looking around, he recognized the mountains, the river, and the trees. It was the place where it all began, the place where his journey started and ended. As he walked towards a nearby lake, he saw his reflection. It was him, older. He looked back at the field where he had lived his final life, a life of simplicity, love, and peace. He thought about his 5 lives. He had lost, failed, suffered, and died countless times. He had been a soldier, a teacher, an outcast, a king, and a commoner. Through it all, he had experienced the highs and lows of existence. He had felt the joys of love, the despair of loss, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat. He had lived a life of war and bloodshed, of glory and honor, of poverty and despair, of power and servitude. And now, here he was, at the beginning of it all, with the wisdom of centuries weighing on his soul. He had learned much along the way, about life, about death, about humanity, and himself. From war, he learned that one man alone cannot change everything. From teaching, he learned that change is slow, but it begins with one heart. From the shadows, he learned that evil breeds evil, and it always returns. From the throne, he learned that power demands care, or it turns to ruin. From peace, he learned that a simple, kind life is not a small life. He had carried the weight of his past lives, the battles fought, the lessons taught, the enemies slain, the kingdoms lost, the families torn apart. But now, as he stood there, watching the sun rise over the familiar landscape, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He was ready to let go of the burdens he had carried for so long. Finally, at the end of his long, winding journey, he found peace. Fog settles again. The light fades, but the story lingers, in echoes, in ashes, in silence. Perhaps you've felt it too. Another whisper waits, somewhere. Until next time, stay close to the flame.